Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Luna Eclipse and today I will be teaching you about the bony one, the skeletal lady, Santa Muerte, the holy saint of death. Before we get into the bulk of everything, I would like to introduce myself just a little bit so you know a little more about me and who I am. I am a second-degree initiate into the OTO. I'm a Wiccan priestess specializing in Norse magic, and I'm also currently holding an Associates of Ministry, soon to be a Bachelor's in Ministry. I'm also a leader on the board of Dayton Pagan Pride and Dayton Pagan Coalition, and I'm on the board of the State Pagans Leaders Association. I'm the founder of the Metaphysical Market Community in Seattle, a devotee and priestess of Santa Muerte, and I've been working with her for over 7 years now. I've also been dedicated to her exclusively going on 4 years. I was introduced to Santa Muerte by a brujo friend and roommate many years ago who taught me a large portion of Santa Muerte magic and native practices, and I've likewise studied under a curandera to help fill in the gaps. I do approach Santa Muerte and her traditional ways with deference always, and respect for native voices and practices, and the way I teach also reflects that. I've been developing and teaching this content in classes and workshops as the Magickal Rosary with Santa Muerte for free online on Second Life, and also locally here in Dayton for 1.5 years now. And by the end of this year, the entirety of the content will be moved to a paid online platform as a full-fledged course. And I currently have a Patreon that's already doing that. I also am working on several books out of this content. I also have a YouTube channel in addition to the Patreon where I will give some of that information as well. But the vast majority of it, without any sort of delays, is on my Patreon, and you can find those links here at the end. For more information about how to join my online community, feel free to contact me at santamuertepriestess@gmail.com. That's Santa, like Santa Claus. Santa Muerte, Muerte, priestess @gmail.com. And I can give you any of that contact info that you desire. We also have a Facebook group that does a lot of work as well. We have about 400 people there, and we dedicate ourselves to working with Santa Muerte. So what I teach in my rosary classes is actually twofold. I teach many different kinds of prayer beads and different magical techniques on them and how to incorporate that magic into your personal practice. And the other half is completely dedicated to Santa Muerte and working her traditional native practices exclusively on the rosary. So we talk about the different traditional ways to work with her and to connect with Santa Muerte, including her origins and history, and a lot of history. A lot of talking about how to approach her from an authentic practice, because that's really important to working and connecting with any being in an authentic way. You need to go back to the roots. Like any other relationship in your life, it can only be fostered through learning about the person and building a relationship through continual effort. I also teach about some ways of blending Santa Muerte into practices and rituals already well known in Western occult practices, but only if it actually is able to be blended that way. Some practices absolutely will not translate to Santa Muerte worship, and other practices that are a little more closely entangled with the Catholic Church, especially some things in ceremonial magic, can work well with Santa Muerte magic, depending. I like to say Santa Muerte is a lot like Madonna. She's ever-changing and ever-evolving, and she often shows herself exactly as we need her to be in the moment, but she never becomes anything completely new. She's always herself, and her roots, that we will discover in a moment, are ever unchanging. The bulk of the practices that I teach with Santa Muerte come from her native traditions and are her native ways. She does, however, enjoy trying on new outfits, as I say, of magical practices from time to time. And she does also enjoy working with other kinds of magic with her devotees, so long as it is not in conflict or does not take away the energy from working with her in her native ways. By allowing her into your established personal practice while simultaneously learning about her native ways and practicing them, you both honor her and show her devotion, and you open up your world to her. I encourage people to develop a personal practice with Santa Muerte as best works for your relationship with her, but in no way should this conflict with the root of who she is, and in no way should this come at the expense of working her traditional magic. Working your own personal magic with Santa Muerte that does not necessarily come out of her roots is extra. It's icing on the cake, and it is a fun way to grow your personal practice with her. But my workshops and groups, we are especially careful of imposing our own will or our own ideas upon her, as this is the definition of cultural appropriation. Which brings me to the topic of cultural appropriation. As Western occultists, it is easy to accidentally incorporate cultural appropriation without meaning to, and to accidentally impose our own preconceived concepts upon her native traditions and native ideas. It is very easy for us to come to Santa Muerte magic and to any idea of magic from the Santa Muerte perspective, from what we know already, to comprehend that which we don't understand. That's just the nature of human beings. And in Santa Muerte magic, there are many concepts that our Western society, or even our occult sciences that we study from a Western lens, simply do not have words or concepts for that are similar to the native Mexican practitioners. And in fact, some ways they understand these things in very different ways than we do. The concepts between the Western world and traditional indigenous Mexican or Magickal ways are not synonymous, and that's very important to understand. So when working with a deity or saint or entity from a different culture than ours, especially when this culture is of native origin to the region, we must be very careful of overlapping our own bias onto the native culture and ideology. We must be very careful not to appropriate culture, spirituality, philosophy, or ideology. We must leave our own ideas and understanding and philosophy at the door and be receptive to seeing a whole new way of being that goes as deep as the language itself, which shapes the brain and social structure of societies. Some cultures and languages have a very open concept of time, for example, where everything past, present, and future is spoken about in the present tense. So just language itself can shape concepts surrounding spirituality, philosophy drastically, very drastically differently than Eurocentric ideologies. It is important, therefore, that we keep this in mind and try to learn Santa Muerte magic without applying or overlapping even our own understanding of basic concepts such as time or gender or rationality or death or anything that we think that we already understand. This is actually harder to do than you may think, but taking the time to go deep and suspend your own interpretations of what you think is accurate, when in fact it may be clouded by your own preconceived notions. It allows you to go deep with a deity and to understand them and their practices on their terms, not your terms. So when working with Santa Muerte, you must try to suspend your own understanding of basic concepts so you can truly grasp how deep the mysteries of Santa Muerte go, and so you can truly harness her power based in her mysteries. So beware of a culture of cultural appropriation, even if it's merely subconscious or based off your own misunderstandings of her. Understand that this is going to happen and that you must counteract this. Santa Muerte will work with you to remedy any of these things in a kind and gentle way, teaching you new concepts and ways of looking at life and the world around you. Beware of judging or misunderstanding her concepts at first glance. And if you mess up, it's simple. Just learn from the experience and then transcend what you think you knew so that you can develop a deeper relationship with her. She will teach you how to release the things that you think that you know at the door at her feet. She will absolutely love you for taking the time and the energy to do this, and she will bless you for trying your hardest. Santa Muerte is the personification of death itself. She is also known as La Santísima Muerte, which is translated as Holy Death. She is a pseudo-pagan, unofficial Catholic saint, disavowed by the Catholic Church and worshipped by her followers in Mexico and now all over the world. Hers is the fastest growing cult or religion, however you want to say it, fastest growing belief system in the world, and her official modern church originates out of Tepito, Mexico City. Her roots can be traced back through Mexican brujeria, through the La Catrina movement, back through Catholic influence, through Spanish occupation and Inquisition, as well as Eurocentric philosophy on witchcraft that was brought to the New World, all the way beyond her origins as an Aztec, quote, goddess of death, which we'll learn about in a minute, and back even farther still into forgotten pre-Aztec ages. She was known to the Aztecs as Mictlantecuhtli. Sometimes that is known as Mictecacihuatl, depending on what you read, or that translates to Queen of Mictlan, or when Mictlan was the Aztec underworld. She was the mother of the bones, the guardian of the humans from past worlds, and the mother and guardian of the humans of this fifth world that we currently live in. She is constantly reinventing herself, ever changing to suit the times, yet always unchanging. Death is the only constant certainty for us all. She is a fierce protector and advocate of those who suffer, of the poor, of the disenfranchised. Santa Muerte is death itself, and she helps us to live a good life. She walks beside us and protects us, and when she reaps us, she wants us to have no regrets. A good death comes from a life well lived. Santa Muerte loves us all and simply wants us to live a good life before she comes for us. Death is love and life is her gift. She is the embodiment of death as a primal force, as well as all the elements that surround death itself and that surround the underworld. So anything that you know of death, the underworld, kings and queens of the underworld, she is all of that, plus the primal force of death itself. She is a being of, quote, karma. I'm using that term loosely, and it can be hard for humans to understand what that means, as our view and perception of the laws of karma and death is very human-centered. Hers is structured around the primal nature of death and life itself. It's a pure understanding of the laws of this life that humans cannot comprehend at more than the surface level. She is the void. She is the moment of transformation, of breakdown, of things that are dying and things that are being allowed to be reborn. That is her realm. So in this nature, some can not only be confused by her and her ways, but some are very afraid, and some are even terrified at that which they do not know or understand, that which they fear. But her magic is extremely stable and grounded, and her power runs primally deep to the depths and the roots of life itself. She is the dark half of life. She is the force that allows for creation and disintegration and transformation. She is death. She is the force with which granted us life, although she was not the force that literally created us. Her modern incarnation and even her name is a bit of an evolution from her past. Originally, the Aztec goddess of death, Mictlantecuhtli, or in some places you might see it as Mictecacihuatl, she ruled the underworld and underrealms of Mictlan with her husband, Mictlantecuhtli. She was responsible for watching over the bones of the past sons. There had been 4 incarnations of humans or human-like beings in the past eons, and they had been marked by 4 separate suns or eras. When the gods came to her to begin the 5th sun, she didn't want to give up the bones. She didn't want to let us go. She didn't want us to suffer. She was our mother, and she wanted to watch over us. She wanted to love us. In some accounts, she was tricked by a god trying to steal the bones, and in doing so, he tripped and fell, and the bones of all the aeons broke and mixed together. And this is why we have humans of varying shapes and sizes and colors. In any case, the agreement that they reached was that Pt1 would watch over the living as she watches over the bones, as our mother. And in death, she will be the one to reap us and to return us to her bosom and a loving embrace when we return to her realms of Pt1. So the Aztecs believed that the souls of their ancestors went to the underworld, which was called Pt1, where they were protected by Pt1, who was the Lady of the Dead, who used the bones of the dead to make new life. Once a year, she would arise to visit the living, bringing the souls of their ancestors with her. During Pt1's visit in August, they would hold a month-long celebration in honor of the goddess and their ancestors with music, dances, and ofrendas or offerings. The Aztecs believed that it was offensive to mourn the dead, and instead they celebrated life. This is definitely in alignment with Santa Muerte's focus on living a good life, because death comes for us all. In this way, she is our mother who cares deeply for us and loves us, but she is also not beyond kicking us in the rear end when we need it. She simply loves us deeply and wants us to live our lives to the fullest in the best way that we can. Because of this, she is perfect for working different kinds of shadow work. She wants us to reclaim our power in this life so we can truly live. She is our mother who could never truly birth us, as she is death, not life, and we are forever her children. In Aztec artwork, she is depicted as a skeleton with an open jaw, swallowing the stars during the day, reminiscent of the depictions of Saturn swallowing his children, or concepts surrounding Ra, the sun god who travels the sky. This artwork depicts the cycle of life and death to the Aztecs, and is not uncommon in other different peoples in the world. Death is not something to fear. The ending and the beginning of a new day are not something to fear. The ending and beginning of generations, as it were for Saturn, is not something to fear. Death comes for us all, and death, Santa Muerte, is ever watching over us. We will eventually return to her loving embrace. Santa Muerte's origins are as the first child who died before tasting the nectar of life, or the bride that dies right before her wedding. It's the concept of the child of possibility whose possibility was ended before she had the opportunity to taste life. The concept of someone who is awaiting the beginning of their life, and that possibility, that potential, that promise was cut short. That is the energy of Santa Muerte, and so therefore she embodies more than anything else in this world the void of death, that void of regeneration, of breakdown, of transcendence, the ability to transcend, to break down, to transform, that energy there of the void. That is what Santa Muerte is. Her mythos is that she was the first human baby to die or be sacrificed, and thus she was claimed through her own divine right to the power of the queen of the underworld, or Pt1. And again, this is kind of shadowed, but basically it's that concept of the beginning, but you don't even get the beginning. You don't get the promise. You don't get any of it because it's cut short. So she understands suffering. She was alone and in the darkness and searched within herself for the power needed. In this way, you may feel compelled to equate her to Persephone, but make no mistake, she is death. itself. She's the literal force of death, not just a queen of the underworld. She does not directly translate to any Western understanding or stereotype or archetype. And so we must be careful, again, of not mislabeling so that we do not fall into the grasp of cultural appropriation. Santa Muerte is her own thing. She is not just some of these concepts surrounding death, but she is also death itself. In releasing what we think we know about death and the concepts that we think we know about the underworld deities, in releasing that and understanding Santa Muerte at the nature of who she is, at the root of who she is, in Mexican culture, in Magickal society, and going back all the way to the Aztecs, to the Nahuatl, to the Magickal people, we're able to then learn more about who she truly is and release our own view of concepts that we've learned, to experience her and her mysteries outside of our current understanding. And in doing so, we will attain a separate but overarching understanding of her mysteries, and a deeper view of life and death itself. Santa Muerte, or rather Mictlantecuhtlic's counterpart in Aztec mythology, was Tonantzin. She was the earth goddess, the one who created life. Mictlantecuhtli allowed the bones to be brought back to life, but it was her counterpart, her sister, Tonantzin, who was given the power to birth the bones back to life. This mythology is a bit shrouded in mystery, but this relationship has been equated to that of sisters, or also like two sides of the same coin. They are the energy, the primal energy that sustains life. It is life and death. It is the light, the dark. And we can see this in lots of different ways. This is deeper than just the secret of Santa Muerte, as she symbolizes the duality between life and death. But as the Aztec or Magickal people were conquered by Spanish Catholic conquistadors, the gods and goddesses were assimilated by the Magickal Nahuatl indigenous people into Catholicism through methods of forceful integration to Catholic and European ways. The Catholic saints and, quote, deities, or, quote, pantheon, for lack of a better term, were merged with the Aztec gods. Tonantzin became Mary, or Our Lady of Guadalupe, and you can still see Tonantzin's sacred imagery even today in depictions of Our Lady with her green cloak, and she even appeared in visions on the same sacred hill as Tonantzin's shrine once lay. And Mictlantecuhtli became Santa Muerte, who became an underground and disavowed Catholic folk saint. She is seen as a heretical figure by the Catholic Church, even to this day. And it is important to mention that this forced assimilation into Catholicism, a lot of this pain and suffering and death is a constant thing in Mexican or Magickal history, and it is definitely something that is very at the forefront of their cultural awareness. Death can come for anyone. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you happen to have no other alternatives. That is part of the energy that Santa Muerte comes out of, and as someone who does not originate from that culture, it is important that you place yourself into that culture to understand their concept of death, which is something that lives next to you every day of your life. Every day that you wake up, death walks alongside you, because you never know what's going to happen to you. It is very important to understand this concept of death, even if you don't experience that in your own life, because perhaps you live in a more privileged area or a more privileged existence. It is important to understand that this is the concept that Santa Muerte comes from. Death does come for us all. It doesn't matter what country we live in. We are all skeletons beneath the surface. Santa Muerte recognizes that. So for anyone who wants to become part of Santa Muerte magic, a lot of people will do something where they dedicate. There is no such thing for Santa Muerte magic. We are inducted into Santa Muerte magic from the day that we are born on this earth, because we will die. Because of our birth, we will die. And so therefore, every single person on this earth is allowed to become a part of Santa Muerte and her magic if we choose to do so. So this is something that we must approach from a place of respect and deference, but it is also a path that is open to every single person because of the nature of Santa Muerte and life and death itself. As stated before, the Aztec gods do come from a pre-Columbian Mesoamerican religion. A lot of people refer to them as the Magickal people, which is where we get Mexico or Mexicans from. But these made up a lot of different sub-tribes. Nahual was one. The Nahual people, they were one of the people that were part of this. You also had the Aztecs. You had many others. From these people's ancestors, the Aztecs or the Nahual or the Magickal people, they inherited and adopted the gods of Mictlan, and they later were syncretized with the Catholic saints. A lot of the gods were syncretized with the Catholic saints, and as the ancient Mesoamericans had a deep reverence toward death, it is not surprising that Santa Muerte's cult survives to this day. It is important to remember that her shift from an Aztec underworld deity to a folk saint came about from forced integration of natives to the Eurocentric ideals around the ideologies of the Catholic Church. Many native people were brutally killed for their belief in the gods before this integration was fully recognized, and the European Catholics, seeing her as evil, attempted to erase her completely. In the Catholic Church, it is Jesus and God who have the power over death, which is not entirely true. Death was the final teacher of Jesus. No one has power over death. Death is a force. And it is part of the all. And so this is something that they recognize, but the Catholics do not recognize this, and so therefore she is a disavowed Catholic saint. Many native people were brutally killed for their belief in the gods before this integration was fully recognized. The European Catholics, seeing her as evil, attempted to erase her completely, and they still try to do so. Her holy day, Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos, which originated over 5,000 years ago in the cultures of many indigenous people of Central America, including the Aztec, the Maya, the Toltec. It was moved from August to November to coincide with All Saints' Day in the Catholic calendar. So instead of a month-long festival in August, in Mexico they now celebrate Day of the Dead on November 1st and 2nd, Catholic All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And Santa Muerte's birthday is actually, well, they call it her birthday. It's actually on November 2nd. It is her holiest of holy days in the whole year. But as with many things in Mexican traditional culture, the Spanish did not completely wipe out indigenous practices and beliefs. Catholicism simply cloaked the old ways with a new finish. Indigenous ways went underground, and many were still practiced openly under the guise of Catholicism to hide them. Dia de los Muertos continues to be a celebration of life, although a lesser day for Santa Muerte is still recognized as August 15th. Many modern Mexicans recognize their ancient deities were blended into the Catholic pantheon out of necessity, and some may still recognize the original deities fused together with the images of the saints, but many choose not to acknowledge these roots, and many either are not aware of Santa Muerte or the connection or how they connect the saints to the old gods. Some people in Mexico today actually believe that Santa Muerte is evil. So not everyone is aware of Santa Muerte. Not everyone worships Santa Muerte. And even if you talk about it, many will pretend that they don't know, even if they know. After the integration of native beliefs into Catholicism, many of the Aztec deities wore the cloak of Catholic saints, and others like Santa Muerte went underground for many, many years, sometimes centuries, their veneration continuing in secret. In the 1700s, Santa Muerte's modern name was recorded in the annals of the Church and the Inquisition, as Mexican Pago-Catholic probationers were found leading an effigy of a skeletal bride throughout the streets, beating it and demanding favors from the spirit. This is a unique and fascinating practice that continues with some practitioners of Santa Muerte, although in most practices with her, this concept seems to have gone out of style. There is, however, saint shaming, and you will see that not just with Santa Muerte, but with other saints, with some people who are native Mexican practitioners. When a saint is petitioned and does not produce enough quick enough results for the practitioner's satisfaction, they may punish them by turning the candles or effigies around, refusing to give sacrifices, covering the effigy on the altar with a cloth until they produce the results that they desire. You might see a saint facing the corner on its head. That's another way of doing this. Taking away Santa Muerte's scythe is another way to do this. Taking away the baby from the Virgin Mary or Tonantzin, that's another way of doing this. While it is said that this practice does end up producing results, as a seer, I personally don't believe that we as impatient humans who only have a very restricted view of our lives and of what we need, I don't believe that we always know what is best for us, or that we can even see into the future enough to know exactly what is currently being woven and exactly what we want or need. We are willful creatures, and that is someone who's a tarot reader telling you this. A lot of people don't really know what they want. And so I think it's personally better to be able to co-wield the powers of death and be able to command such things in a way that's co-creation, being able to allow for a state of grace in our lives because we might not know what we want. That's my personal belief. However, this practice is actually native, and so it must be respected. So for me, choosing to co-command her energies is how I translate this practice into my own. How you work with Santa Muerte is only between her and the practitioner, and this aspect is certainly one method that some do use. Santa Muerte iconology and ideology did resurface in the cultural annals again a century later in a political movement of La Catrina. At the beginning of the 20th century, Jose Guadalupe Posada created a similar but secular figure by the name of Catrina, a female skeleton dressed in women's fancy clothing of the period. This was an artistic, philosophical, and political statement against the class inequality rampant in Mexico at the time. The statement being made was that death, being universal, allows for fundamental equality, while we collectively are a violent and unjust society. The image and symbology found in this art style is recognizable as the sugar skull and Catrina artistry celebrated during Day of the Dead, which, as Santa Muerte's modern holy day on November 2nd, also shares a lot of symbology with her mysteries, and it is one way that you can go deeper into her mysteries. Modern veneration of Santa Muerte and practices akin to what we may see today were observed and resurfaced again throughout the 1940s through the 1960s, here and there, although her cult still remained largely underground. She resurfaced again in the 1990s into popular culture as her altars were discovered entangled with the cartels, which earned her a bad reputation, unfortunately. She did finally emerge back into the light in the early 2000s when her church in Tepito erected a permanent shrine, and then the church leading services every week to hundreds gathered in the streets. She can now be found in botanicas and roadside shrines everywhere, and her cult has spread into the United States and even beyond, where she has earned and gained quite a following. You can also see her a lot of times in different depictions, in different things in Hollywood. So Santa Muerte does not judge. She loves and accepts all equally as her children. We are all her children, and she loves us all. So she helps enable us to live our best lives so that she can grant us a good death, hopefully when it is our time and not beforehand. This can look a bit chaotic to human beings who judge themselves and also judge others. We judge ourselves to be worthy of such things, which is absolutely ridiculous as far as Santa Muerte is concerned. We may think that some people are not worthy of happiness or success, or that we ourselves are not worthy. And Santa Muerte wants a good life for all of her children, no matter what we've been through, no matter what we've done. She will never turn anyone away, and she will be the one to greet us in her arms upon our death. Death is love itself. She will help anyone who seeks her, but she will not help you to unduly harm or force human judgment or revenge or harm upon others without it coming at a great cost. She is karmic justice, not Judgment. She is the great equalizer. She will sometimes use a sort of trickster energy to teach you or to lead you into the path that's best for you. She does not judge. Instead, she allows your actions to speak for themselves. She always loves you no matter what you do, no matter what you have done. She will give you the rope that you desire to enable you to either succeed or to hang yourself, depending on your choices. Either way, the choices will eventually lead you back into her loving embrace anyway. Death comes for us all. She is a hands-on teacher, and she will place things in your path to teach you. And she also respects the chaotic nature of free will. When you petition Santa Muerte for something that is of darker energy and something that is not beneficial to others, you are actually talking to the spirits of death, the carrion that like to feast on the negative energies, and you are not actually using Santa Muerte's magic in the way that it is supposed to be used. We ourselves, with our free will, we are chaotic creatures to her. Bottom line, she is non-judgmental, and she will want to teach you to be free from judgments as well, because we don't understand this naturally, so it can feel a little bit confusing to us until we see and feel it in action. She does not judge us. She allows our consequences of our actions to speak for ourselves. We will either reap the benefits or reap the consequences of the seeds that we have sown, and that does not matter to her, because no matter what, we will end up in her arms at the end of it all. Santa Muerte is death itself, a primal force, as I've said, and so she will aid all of her children when they call to her without judgment, even more so to her devotees who she truly treasures. As I mentioned previously, her rules and cosmic viewpoint is even more primal and less aligned with the human concepts of justice and morality. For example, both of the cartels and the police work with Santa Muerte to keep themselves safe. Santa Muerte will answer anyone's call. She loves us all and she doesn't judge us. She will grant us our wishes and she will help us to live our best lives no matter what we have done. Because of this duality, she is often misunderstood by those in Hollywood and popular culture and even in the Catholic Church as a, quote, cartel goddess. And this is not entirely true. She simply loves those in the cartel as much as anyone else and still sees them as valid human beings. She sees them as her children as well as anyone else, and she will help them to live a good life as she will help every one of you. It's up to us to decide how we wish to use her help, and we will either suffer or enjoy those consequences. There is, however, a possibility for one not to have a good death, and this makes death herself cry and mourn. The concept of life potential that's needlessly wasted, it does create a deep pain within Santa Muerte, as it is a pain that she knows. She who has known only death, she who has had this potential taken away. She knows this intimately, and it hurts her. After witnessing the aftermath last year of the live shooter event in Dayton, I was brought to tears by the confused, emotional, and upset spirits and the grief-stricken mourning of Santa Muerte herself. She was crying for the spirits. She showed me that sometimes she is forced to give someone a death that is not the good death that she would like to give us all. Humans are chaotic creatures, and although she is welcome, she will always welcome us back into her arms. When these unfortunate humans are reaped, they are not ready yet to cross over. It does take them a little bit of time, depending on how long they need, to return to her loving embrace. She mourns for that. She is a lady of immense compassion, and this is the only chaos I've ever seen that makes her weep and cry out and mourn. It was a bone-chilling sight, and eventually the victims of that shooting did find their way back to her arms, but it did take some time, and it took community involvement and healing. As someone who has for over a decade worked with spirits for a living, this was one of the most intense experiences I've witnessed with her, and also that I've witnessed with the dead. Keep in mind, time upon this earth is not the indicator of a good life and a good death. There are many things that determine that. How full your life was, how much love you accumulated, what you were able to do and what you had wanted to do in this life, how you reside in the hearts of those that you leave behind. A child that lives for only a day could have a better life and better death than someone who has lived for almost a century. And that is one of the mysteries that Santa Muerte helps her devotees to understand. Some people may wonder why we would want to work with death and may find the concept a bit morbid. Death is power and transformation. It is the mouth and the tail of the Ouroboros coming together. It is the point of transmutation, and as this is the point of change, of breakdown and reintegration through regeneration, it's the point of the greatest power. Human beings all know that death is a sure thing. Many of us have seen and even know death through the events that have unfolded in our lives, and many of us have experienced this intense figurative death internally as well as externally, and we know the transformational power it holds. Many who have experienced this, even though it often is one of the hardest things a person goes through at the beginning, ends up craving this, and we wish to know its mysteries deeper. Befriending quiet darkness and death gives you power and truth, not just of the universe itself, but also within your own being. You must transform your inner darkness and fears to truly embrace the mysteries and power of death. The mysteries of death in Santa Muerte are very personal. Death comes for us all, but in the meantime, she wants us to live a good life before she comes to reap us and end that life. Santa Muerte can only embody death. Life is the one thing she cannot have or experience. Therefore, it's the one thing she truly holds sacred. Santa Muerte is a full magical system in herself. You don't need to work with anyone else if you don't want to. Her modern ways of worship have emerged from a mixing and blending of various forms of magic to develop her own unique system. Her physical expressions of magical work stem from her Aztec and native Nahuatl and Magickal origins, from Mexican traditional witchcraft or brujeria, native healing and magical systems of curanderismo, European grimoire traditions, Catholicism, African diasporic traditions, political class activism, and more recently even some hoodoo, modern paganism, Wicca, voodoo, chaos magic, and straight woo. Her worship and practices have become a bit of a creole over the centuries, and even today she merges with concepts and ideas, powerfully taking up residence in modern hearts and minds of those who need her magic in her lives. Different facets of her essence are found in many works, my favorite pop culture reference being Death in the Sandman comics, and some versions of Death found as characters in anime. This eclectic nature she has risen from underground into, quite literally, gives rise to an ever-evolving cult. Her, quote, religion is the fastest growing and most evolving one in the world, which allows some wiggle room for assimilation to the practitioner, meaning her mysteries and magic are very personal, just as much as they are also cultural. They're steeped in the deep and rich culture of Mexico, and she does, to some extent, structure her magic to the personal practices of the individual that she works with. She wants us to be comfortable with her, and she enjoys working our own personal magic with us. But make no mistake, she will also expect you to learn her cultural and native ways the right way. She will definitely make you learn her ways her way. Although Santa Muerte is more flexible with how she will work with you than many other entities, it is very important to learn how she has existed traditionally, the methods of magic associated with her, and to respect her connection to traditional Mexican native craft spanning many centuries back to the Aztecs and even beyond. Santa Muerte is and always will be aligned with this native Magickal energy. So be careful to learn her traditional and cultural ways, her history, and respect the roots that she comes from. The way she works with practitioners is more like weaving and braiding your ways with hers, respecting both. To honor Santa Muerte, give her anything that is of life, that is life itself. What she craves is the essence of life, all of it. Joys, pain, laughter, sorrows. She wants us to live a full life. Devoting your life to her, therefore, is the highest service one can give. The joy she feels when we live a full life is her greatest reward. She loves nothing more than enjoying it with you, celebrating and crying with you, working her magic with you, granting you access to her power, sharing herself with you while you share the essence of life with her. This is true devotion to her, and this is what my courses and community groups are about and what they teach you to do. If you would like more information regarding any of the things that I do, feel free to ask me. My contact info again, if you go to www.lunaeclipse.com, you can get an introductory presentation on Santa Muerte, who she is and how she works with her, if you subscribe to my website for exclusive access to this free content. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at santamuertepriestess@gmail.com. And if you would like to join our sacred community online, we have a Facebook group, we have a YouTube channel, and we also have a Patreon. And I am building this group up into a solid community for support and continuing education and practice. We have a lot of hands-on content. You can find these resources here as well. Facebook.com, in the group section, Santa Muerte Rosary. You can also find our YouTube channel at the link that I have provided. And then if you go to Patreon, it's also under Santa Muerte Rosary. And I look forward to meeting you online. Have a fantastic evening.